So we're dedicated to spreading good messaging and fighting the good fight on social media, empowering people to use their social media accounts strategically. So very excited to kick off this conversation with David. The last time we got together, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Lori and Jamie, our last democracy briefing was wasn't it the night of the voting rights vote?
Before it.
It was like just before the vote.
It was during
it. So, that wasn't great. Not completely unexpected, but I think everybody had some hope. But what David Pepper's going to talk about here today, and what Doug Jones is going to come on and talk to us about later, directly relates to that: the fight for voting rights, the fight for democracy. And so, without further ado, I'll introduce David. David, thanks for joining us. This is David Pepper. He's an author. He's an activist, a longtime Ohio warrior trying to save his state, who wrote an amazing book, which maybe Jamie or Lori could throw the link, the Amazon link to, Laboratories of Autocracy. That came out last fall that really, really sums up very well the quiet coup that's happening in state legislatures across the country. So we wanted to invite him on to share a little bit more about that. So thank you very much for coming, David.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks to you and your team. You do a great job, and you lift so many people, and you've lifted me repeatedly, which I so appreciate. Not just the book, but a lot of the other work I do. So you really are helping spread the word in a way that when Nick or Demcast retweets me, I know it's going to get seen. I really appreciate that. So everyone tonight, it's great to see you all. I'm going to start out, and I'll do this later as well. I am doing all I can to spread the word about what's happening. That's why I wrote the book, and I'm trying to do it in terms that really kind of wake people up. So I'm already seeing people from all over the country. If you, after this, have a group you want me to speak to, you're in your state of activists, a book club, whatever it is, that's my email, davidpepper4ohio@gmail.com. I get it directly. I have whiteboard, will travel. I am here to try and, we got to come to grips with the tough situation we face. And once we do that, then we can also get inspired about how to fight that battle. And that's sort of the point of my book. And just to give a slight background, I know this is mainly be a conversation with Nick and others. I've written a few novels. They've done okay. I have one coming out in June. I had no notion of writing a book last year. But come around April, I saw what many of you, I think, are seeing that too few are seeing, which was this relentless attack on democracy. And we've seen it in Ohio. And I stepped away from the party in January, and it really allowed me to sort of see the whole picture in a way that I hadn't before. But sort of like the book, What's the Matter with Kansas? I thought, let me use the pain. And I go through stories, and I think storytelling is such an important part of messaging. So I do in my book using the novel writing I've done, but it's the real stories, to make sure people understand how painful it is in these states that are basically seeing their democracy not just die, but dead. It's dead in many of the states that were gerrymandered in 11. In the warped government and outcomes and behavior that have resulted from basically the destruction of democracy in these states is painful. And so my goal, honestly, in the book, and it's without any exaggeration, don't be afraid. A whole lot of the pages are footnotes. There are like 800 of them. It's not as long as it looks. The whole point was to make people see, my God, this is worse than I knew. The outcomes are worse than I ever realized. The rigging of elections and intentional suppression, and then nationalizing it through groups like ALEC, are so much worse than we realized. And I mean, it's terrible to say that this sounds good, but when my own mother, who's an activist like many here, said, David, after she read my draft, this is worse than I knew, and I'm involved. And others have said, and I'll tell you, when I was done writing it, I was more horrified than when I started. It's that difficult. And so just to get a big picture on it, and I said this on one whiteboard, we are fighting too often on our side. We assume democracy is just fine. So we're fighting to win federal elections that give us the outcomes we want to get what we want done substantively. The other side knows that their worldview is a minority view in this country, from trickle-down economics to white supremacy to attacking Roe v. Wade to all the other stuff to horrific public outcomes by privatizing everything. The book is called Laboratories of Autocracy. Let me answer your question. They realize that. So while we're battling federal elections to get the outcomes we want, assuming democracy is perfectly fine, their battle is a different one. Their battle is to undermine democracy because it's the only way they can lock in a structure that allows them to accomplish a worldview that would never be sustained in a real democracy. And so while we fight federally, they know the keys to subverting democracy are in state houses across this country, in associated offices. While we focus on swing states to win federal elections, they focus on every single state in this country that can play a role to undermine democracy. While we get excited every 4 years and sometimes every 2, they do a fight every year. And the point of the Laboratories of Autocracy explains the way they're doing it. They care less about the dynamism of candidate and more about the infrastructure that lets them subvert democracy. We get excited about exciting candidates and look the other way when they're not exciting. They don't care about that. They care about the institutions that give them control. They've been doing it for years. In the way they've done it, they figured out it works. It works to a charm. It works as long as they keep taking the steps to subvert democracy. And that's what the book describes. And it basically is a challenge. All of us on this call, up to Joe Biden, up to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and everybody, we need to redraw the battle. We have to understand, too, like they have for 30 years, it's about democracy. And if it is, and you are already doing this, so I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, but we got to do it more broadly. We got to reframe everything we do to understand it's a battle for democracy, which means it's on every year. It's in 50 states. It's in every district of every state. No more uncontested districts. That's a gift to those subverting democracy. No more treating some offices like they're not important if they have influence on democracy, which state houses do and state Supreme Court races. We got to get in the game in the battle for democracy and see it for what it is, and see that it's a long game like Stacey Abrams did, and see that it's a game that requires us to fight everywhere and not just pick a few select places that are swing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The book walks through sort of, and we'll talk about a Q&A, all this and how it works and how these state houses are the perfect place for them to seize control of democracy. But then it walks through 30 practical steps that follow when you reframe the battle to being the battle that it really is. So with that, I will take it to Nick. I know you got a bunch of questions to ask, and we'll go from there. That's a very quick summary of a whole lot of sort of problematic things going on.
No, that's a really good high level framing for the work that you've done and what's in the book. One of the concepts that you kind of introduced me to, I guess I'd thought of it intuitively, but I'd never really known the term for it before, is competitive autocracy. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that and how
Sure.
How that pertains?
So let me just put it this way. If you saw another country undertaking the following steps, we'd actually call it out as a massive problem. Rigging legislative elections so they basically are always won by the same party, even when the majority of the voters vote the other way. Attacking independent courts, attacking the voters of the opposition party so it's harder for them to vote. Impossible in some cases for them to assert their majority status. Changing the way we do elections to put it in more partisan hands of the governing party. Ignoring referenda passed in that state by the voters or in that country by the voters that changed the law. Attacking the protesters that represent the opposition, changing the history, or censoring the history. We would literally look at that country, and let me give you an example, Hungary, and say, my God, that former democracy is no longer democracy. It's something else. And that something else, the newest version of it, the academics will call it competitive autocracy. And it's a system that doesn't feel as egregious as Putin. It's a system where you have elections that look legitimate, but almost everything has been predetermined to guarantee the outcome, even when a majority votes the other way. And a key to that system is that it looks legitimate, even though in the end, it actually does not reflect the majority of the people of that country. Everything I just described, all those elements, are not just Hungary. They are almost every state house I describe in my book. They're all doing the same thing. And so when we have not really come to terms with this reality that these state houses have essentially ceased being, and I really hadn't either until you think about it. We got to be honest about it. People are mentioning Arkansas and Georgia and Texas. In a few states we're closer, but many of them have ceased being functioning democracies. They're more like Hungary than they are what we would think of as a healthy democracy. And the scary part about that model is if they're able to convince everybody that it's, oh, Orban really won the election. It wasn't like Saddam Hussein 98-2. It was 55-45. But they did everything advanced to guarantee that it was 55. It sustains longer because people kind of who aren't paying as much attention walk away. And so in addition to battling all the elements of competitive autocracy that they are trying to build up in these states, we also have to be more clear cut about what this all is. And by the way, it's helpful that Tucker Carlson is going to Hungary and interviewing Orban. It's helpful that CPAC is having the next conference in Hungary. It's helpful that Donald Trump endorsed Orban. They're not being subtle that they love that version of governing, which is competitive autocracy. And we have to start, making clear that that's what they're building. Because if we aren't clear, and this is why like silence in the face of these attacks, or even normal behavior, accepting the filibuster as an obstacle to attacks on democracy, letting Chuck Schumer or whoever, not Chuck Schumer, Chuck Grassley and Josh Hawley defeat that voting rights bill without even having to stand for 3 days and make the argument. Everything we do that doesn't suggest it's a crisis, that it is a crisis, adds to the competitive autocracy nature of it. It starts to feel normal. I love that the Texas legislators left. If they're trying to get competitive autocracy into a state, you've got to call it out for, no, this is not normal. This is not the democratic playing field this country respects. And we have to start saying that. And you'll see, Nick, you probably retweeted a few of when I testified at hearings in our state house. And I'm a polite person. I mean, I've always been kind of a nice guy. I wasn't nice. I told him, I said, I know what you guys are doing. You've never been in real elections and you don't want them. This is not legitimate. And I think we all have to start to not allow the competitive autocracy, the legitimization of it to set in. We have to, I think, be more clear on how illegitimate what they're doing is. And sometimes I worry that some Democrats are still in the mindset that, oh, we have to be civil on all sorts of things. But if they're going after democracy itself, don't be civil. Call it out for being as illegitimate and corrupt as all this stuff is. Because if you don't, you basically are falling into the hands. I mean, let me give an example. Now, he may not have worded it perfectly, but Joe Biden the other day said, well, if this continues, it might call into question the legitimacy of election outcomes in 22 or 24. And everyone said, oh, that's Donald Trump. No, it's obvious. If they change the way we count votes, who counts them, suppress a whole lot of voters, and gerrymander all the districts so they can't lose, of course that calls into question the results. That's what a competitive autocracy does. And to censor people for actually saying that it may lead to people questioning the outcomes, that also is contributing to this sort of overlay that we legitimize things aren't legitimate. So I think we have to be much more bold about calling this out. And again, it doesn't hurt us that they're the ones making field trips to Hungary as they do all this crazy stuff.
And you make the point that, just 14 years ago in 2008, Ohio went for Obama.
Correct.
And that's when, maybe that was a breaking point for the Republican Party in Ohio. But describe sort of how the chips fell from there in terms of the next few years.
By the way, I am seeing comments like, we are doomed, we can't do it, we're done. No. Stacey Abrams turned Georgia blue because she thought about everything I'm describing the way I'm describing it. It's a continual fight. We are not doomed. We must keep going. And that's why if you get the book, read to the end, because there are ways out and there are real weaknesses in what they're doing that give us pathways out. But we have to reframe it, and then we can succeed. So we're not doomed because of just one cycle in Virginia, for example. Youngkin's already underwater. He will govern in a way that all these other states are governed, which means disastrous public outcomes, deeply unpopular measures. And if we run well in 4 years, we will replace him with a Democrat. But we have to be, so I don't accept that we're doomed. I didn't write the book to make us feel doomed. I wrote the book to identify the problem and to say, here's how we fix it. But to the Ohio story for a second. We didn't just win for Obama. When Obama won, we had a Democratic state house. 10 of the 18 members of our congressional delegation were Democrats, and we had a Democratic governor. And the reason I tell this story of Ohio is because it's and by the way, I get into a lot of other states, including a number that are being mentioned here, that have been through the same thing. It's not only about Ohio if you're tired of hearing about Ohio. By the way, go Bengals. When they lost in 2008, this was bigger for them than Obama won. His coalition cost them everything in Ohio. And that's what scared them. The history of our country is a massive backlash whenever the diverse majority comes together and says, we're not only white, we're not only living for 100 years ago, we want to move forward and reflect our diverse majority. And when Obama did that in 2008 and cost Republicans state houses, Senate seats, governorships, it scared the hell out of them. Not just because of Obama, because they wanted their own state house back. And their state house had been gerrymandered in 2001 here. So what did they do in 10? The minute they had a chance, after Karl Rove smartly, I hate to give him credit, focused on state houses while we were still celebrating the federal government. In 11, in Ohio and other states, they immediately targeted, like they're doing right now, all the reasons that they lost in 11, all the things that made the Obama coalition strong in voting big numbers. They said, let's go after all those things. The reason I call these laboratories, they're always learning from their failures, from their successes. If one state does something well, like make drop boxes hellishly impossible, the other states start doing it. Well, in 2011, the lesson they learned is that Obama coalition is powerful. It threatens us, and we will change every rule we can and purge every voter we can and rig districts as much as we can so it never does it again. And in Ohio, sadly, that's what they did. That 10-8 the Democrat-Republican congressional delegation, 4 years later, same blue map in 12 when Obama won again, 12-4 Republican-Democrat. Majority State House Democrat, same blue Ohio 4 years ago, supermajority Republican. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they all did that. So they literally get in and they figure out why did they lose and they fix it. And the story in Ohio is sadly, and there are other things that didn't work well as well, by the way, but when they made a concerted effort to change the electorate, to damage the coalition that threatened them, to target it by reducing early vote, purging other rules to knock out voters, it worked. And that's what they're doing all around the country. And they're always learning and they're always doing it. And here's one key piece. The reason they can keep doing these new efforts, they get struck down. Often they're very unpopular, It's because in their own state houses, they're protected from all accountability. They can keep doing it again and again and again. Why? Gerrymandering. And why? Because we haven't focused on beating them back in their state houses. So they literally skate, and they can do it all without accountability. It turns out, I go through this in the book, and this is what the Koch brothers and Alec and the others realize. They can, if they want to do something really unpopular that crushes public outcomes to profit private entities, that attacks democracy, the place you go to do it is a state house, because that's the place where you can do it and get away with it. Again, because the districts are rigged and because we don't fight there. And so we have to change our game plan, stop gerrymandering whenever we can, get these damn senators to vote these laws in front of them, and don't stop fighting, even though they had one vote a couple weeks ago, and then engage that fight in all districts, because it's the lack of accountability at the state house that is literally the reason. Think about a battle when you're in the high ground, you win because the guys in the low ground, that's their high ground. And they just fire away, never lose, never worry about those offices. And until we start fighting back there, they'll keep doing it. And Ohio is a sad case study about how a state that you all probably now think is red was literally blue a decade ago, but they succeeded in flipping it the other way.
Well, and that there's an effect on the quality, the moral quality and the intellectual quality of the people who end up getting into office, right? When they have these monopolies on these districts.
This is maybe one of the things that became most clear to me as I wrote the book. We need to stop being shocked by their bad behavior. Once you realize who these people are, okay? Most states have a term limit. We do, 8 years. They drew districts in 2011, not just to give themselves 62 out of 99 seats, pretty much guaranteed. But I'm going to go through some quick numbers here. 17 of the 62 seats that they're guaranteed averaged a 50% margin of victory, 75-25 or better for the entire decade. 17 out of 62. The next 22 seats averaged a 30-point margin of victory, 65-35. The next 12 seats, 20%, 60-40. That's 50 seats where they've never been in an election. The next 12 seats averaged 10-point wins. That means 62 seats. They didn't just get themselves in power. These people have not been in a democracy. They have not been through real elections like I was when I ran for city council. Everything in their world has been about rigged elections and all the crazy incentives that you face. If you don't face real democracy and you're guaranteed to get reelected, public outcomes don't matter to you, but keeping the private players that fund everything is very important. So you can run down your public school system and to give money to for-profit charter school online scams. That's good politics in their world. Just like being extreme is good politics. You avoid a primary. Never working with the other side is good politics. Being semi-corrupt, as long as you don't get caught by the FBI, is good politics. You get away with it. The point is, they've lived in a world without democracy. It's all they've known. The only way the game continues for them is that they keep democracy at bay. And what they've seen for a decade is no matter how far they go, they are never held accountable. So why not keep going further? And they are scared to death of one thing: real democracy. They're strangers to it. They haven't had to build a campaign team. Everything's been guaranteed. Second, everything they have done, and this is why if we can make breakthroughs on some issues, we have a good future. Everything they have done in their non-democratic world is kryptonite for them in a world of democracy. Their public outcomes are indefensible. As Beto O'Rourke so effectively campaigns on, a failing power grid that left people freezing in Texas to death. Public schools in Kansas 4 days a week. What the hell is that? Pardon my French. Roads falling apart in Michigan, bridges collapsing in near Pittsburgh, the public small towns dying all over. Their public outcomes cannot be defended. If they ever faced real elections, they would be in trouble. That's why we have a Kansas governor who's a Democrat. She had a straight up shot to run on the fact that schools were 4 days a week. She's governor of Kansas, of all places. That's not easy. Michigan, we saw that too. Wisconsin, Stacey came close. they're too extreme. In states like Ohio, we had a bunch of school board races last November where the same anti-mask, anti-vax hysteria was channeled through school board candidates. In Ohio, those candidates got crushed because in a normal school district and not a gerrymandered districts, people don't want that nonsense in their schools. So a few of them won, but most of them lost. So the point is, everything they've been doing in the world, in their gerrymandered world, is the polar opposite of what you do in a real democracy. They know it. They're very vulnerable if there are real elections. And that's why you see them fighting so hard to continue this rigged system they live in. If we can unlock it, like we've done with a few successes recently in Ohio with our Supreme Court decisions, if we get the Senate to do its job, they have a terrible record to defend. And I know you talk a lot about messaging, and I want to hit on this point. My free advice, to the extent it's worth anything, is no one should be running for office on almost anything I just said for the last 25 minutes. This is not the message to win an election, although it's the message we all need to be aware of to get ourselves focused and fighting with the right framework. I believe the message, and you guys maybe are more expert on this than I am, is the public outcomes that result from their current broken governance are horrible for not just Democrats, for across the board. They cannot be defended. And the smartest campaigns, and I keep going to Laura Kelly in Kansas, the smartest campaigns will identify which public outcomes are most troubling to everyday people in my state, and how can I focus on that? Those kind of messages are less toxic, less partisan, and people, again, in Kansas, if you look up Laura Kelly's ads, they are basically, in Kansas, the Kansas I grew up, our values were all about education. What kind of state is running 4 days of school a week? That's not Kansas values. Elect me governor. She could have talked about Chris Kobach every day. We all could. That wasn't her focus. It was that schools were 4 days a week. Whitmer was the roads are falling apart. Beto's talking about an energy grid collapsing. The more we can focus on the public outcomes that are an inevitable decline because of this broken system, the better we do.
Hear, hear. So I think I really appreciate this, because I think it is really important. Like again, this is not a doomsday message. It's more of a eyes wide open message. We need to understand.
Don't look up, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We need to understand what's actually happening
Right.
in this country to be able to combat it. So
if you're on this call, you're in this battle, and I know you're not going away. I'm not. There's a lot of fighters out there. I meet with a group like this every night. There are so many fighters, and this group isn't quitting. I'm not quitting. I got 2 young kids. I don't want them spending 50 years fighting for democracy that we somehow lost. So the question is, what is the actual problem? What have we been doing wrong in our approach? And when we exert all our energy forward, how do we do it so it's most effective? That was sort of the point of the book. Mm-hmm. And the good news is there are great case studies of how people have fought back. They're all over the place. We have some even in Ohio, despite all the bleakness. We took a 7-0 Republican Supreme Court, flipped 3 seats in 2 years because we were paying attention. We changed our constitution twice, 75-25. We were red the whole time. Lo and behold, we had our greatest win for democracy in Ohio 2 weeks ago in a generation, because we had a long game and we were focused on state level positions that impacted democracy. You can do that everywhere, but you just have to think about things differently than too many folks have been thinking about it. So yeah, I get fired up when I think about this stuff. Once you adapt a long game mindset, it actually lets you see the light that's out there to get to. If all we do is have a short game, one cycle mindset, we're living or dying on we win federal. Yay, we won everything. We lose it. We lost everything. No, there's a longer game, and that's how we should measure our progress. And when we win some big stuff, like we did with Obama and Biden, we now know that's not winning everything. It's winning some things. But just like when we have a tough year, like in 16, we lost 2 Supreme Court seats when Trump won Ohio by 8. But we had spent a lot of money in those seats to lift the number of people voting in those Supreme Court races. And I could see from the drop off, people voting for the last office and then Supreme Court, many more people were voting, even though they lost. And we knew something good was happening. So we doubled down on that strategy, even though it didn't look good in 16. You could see the progress. 18, we win both races. 20, we win a race by 10, even though Trump won by 8, because we had a long strategy that we kept doing. That's the kind of it. So in that broader vision, there's actually more optimism than this cycle to cycle, live or die based on every cycle mindset we've been stuck in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who really jumped into politics and activism after the Trump win in 2016 don't have the muscle memory to understand that. So I think it's a really important point. Jamie, I want to make sure that we get to some people's questions. Do we have a couple that we could toss to David?
Yeah. So one is, I feel like it's a relief to tell the truth and say we don't live in a democracy right now. Glad you're saying that we should call out reality, but how do you have ideas how to frame it in a way that's galvanizing?
I think you lay out the steps we can all take to fight to get it back in these states. The nation's democracy is still there. What I'm saying is certain states have lost being a functioning democracy. Now that you can fight back for it, it's tough. But I think to stay motivated, let's be clear, we have a national democracy. Some states still meet the basic standards. Others are falling quickly to the wayside, but they can be saved too if we all do the kinds of things we need to do. So the window isn't closed, it's closing. I'm impatient that we didn't do more in 2021 at the federal level. We had to keep pushing in 22 for them to do that. But I don't want to say that it's closed. It's not. But it should alarm everybody that there are many states and people on this list, and I have raised their hands saying, yep. I mean, the number of people who reached out after reading my book saying, you just described Tennessee, where I live. You just described Florida. You just described, it's really unsettling. But the truth is, we can fight for it back. It's going to be harder in these locked up states, but it's not over. And I don't want anyone to think it is, but we got to get it together fast. And it can't, by the way, it can't just, there are people doing some really good work. And I know that, Eric Holder understands it. He helped us, but it can't be a one-off program. It's got to be the mindset of the entire side that's for democracy. It's got to be, the whole, DNC and Chuck Schumer and Biden, that they all see it for the bigger battle that it is and get outside of their own sort of committees and everything else. It can't just be, well, that's what Eric Holder is dealing with, because he is doing a good job and he's helped Ohio a lot. It's got to be broader, bigger. And that's why my book tries to talk to donors and senators as well as everyday activists. But let me just say, I wouldn't be doing any of this if I didn't think we could fight back. But I don't think we should pretend that some of these states are what we could define as functioning democracies. At the legislative level, at least, they're not. And there's a lot of hopelessness. And one other thing to be hopeful for, though, and this gets back to your question, Jamie, it's also to see progress beyond that next cycle. A win in a deep red state that's gerrymandered to hell right now, a win is running in every district. Right now, that's a win. A win is getting enough resources in the hands of every candidate running in all those districts so they can actually muster a campaign. That's a win. That's progress. We don't see the map that way, so we don't even think about that stuff, but that's progress. Right now, if there was a funded state house candidate in every district in Georgia, it could actually make the difference between whether Stacey Abrams wins or loses this November. Same with Tim Ryan in Ohio. So one way to feel morale building is to know you're not going to switch it every time the next cycle, but a win is celebrating whoever stepped up and ran in that very gerrymandered district in a red part of the state where we never normally even campaign. So once you define it as a long game, I think, as I said, you can kind of see the light more. I think there are a lot more wins than we understand. And the person I always quote on this is Stacey again. Stacey Abrams and I happened to be classmates in law school. She clearly took some classes that I somehow missed out on in all sorts of ways. But when she did not win in Georgia and said very clearly, this was a badly tainted election. I'm not going to be governor. I know that. The speech was famous, but one reason I respect the speech so much, and yeah, Indiana is another state. I hear about it all the time. I've talked to folks in Indiana. I'm just looking at the chat here. She also said, we made progress, Jamie. She said, we made progress. Even when she was standing there losing, I've lost. It's really painful. She said, we made progress. And the rest of us probably thought, oh, she's just saying that because she's trying to make everyone feel better. She knew that every door she knocked on, every voter that registered, every voter that voted in the long game of democracy in Georgia was progress. She knew that. And she was saying it to us. And most of us with a shorter game mindset probably let it go right over our head. Who was right? She was.
She was.
That
Well,
progress.
2 Senate seats the very next election.
Right. 2 years later, her progress that she knew that the rest of us thought was probably rhetoric, it showed up real clearly, didn't it? And so I think once you define the battle for what it is, the way to keep your morale going is to see progress in all the things that you're moving the ball forward for democracy beyond that ultimate victory with Senator Warnock and Ossoff. And that's what, and I think that's incumbent on all of us to be thinking through what are all those measures of progress? How are they different than now? As I said, we have not defined failure, most people at least, when everything's about swing districts and swing states. We don't define failure as the fact that 30 districts are being left abandoned in most state house campaign cycles. Progress is filling all those districts. Progress is that each of those candidates can run a real campaign. That's progress. Progress is every registered Democrat in any state that we register that wasn't being registered. We have to just start defining it differently towards that long battle. To me, that actually makes me have great morale. And just as an example, I know I'm talking a lot about this. Biden lost Ohio by 8. Okay. Remember, he was up a little bit. We're like the opposite of Michigan, and our Democrat numbers come in right away, and everyone blows up my phone thinking, my God, you're going to win. And then over the rest of the night, it goes down. Okay. Biden lost Ohio by 8. And the next day, people said to me, wow, how are you handling it? My answer was, I'm actually in a great mood. Biden's going to be president, and we won our most important race for state Supreme Court. Our long game on election night, November 20, was an absolute blowout victory. And even though not everyone saw our long game, like Stacey, it was a week ago that people figured out why I was so happy. I knew that probably meant the end of gerrymandered districts. So on my long game, I was happy, even though most people judging it by, a different definition where everything's about federal offices couldn't see it. So once you define things the right way, I think there's a lot more reason to see morale boost and to see important wins, even though everyone else doesn't necessarily see them.
Let's get to work.
Thank you.
Exactly. So,
and on that note,
yeah, on that note, speaking of pumping people up and helping people feel like there's hope, we also have another guest. Laura, you want to introduce?
Absolutely. Thank you, David. As usual, just amazing helpfulness and helping us concentrate what our messaging needs to be. And now it's my pleasure to introduce again Senator Doug Jones from the great state of Alabama. Okay, I have to say that a little bit because I'm from Tennessee. But I love my Southern friends, my neighbors. I know everyone on this call knows Senator Jones, but just in case, I just wanted to remind everyone, of course, he was elected in 2017. And for many of us, it was a chance to get involved post-Trump and try to fight back and help Senator Jones win his election, which he did. And just amazing, gave us hope in his winning his election, represented his state with such integrity and honor. So we're glad for Senator Jones to be a friend of Demcast's and a strong supporter of democracy. And he's going to give us, he's going to take us to church tonight and tell us what we got to do to make this work. So welcome, Senator.
Well, Lori, thank you. Thanks for everybody, and thanks for joining. Thanks for having me again. And thanks to David for coming in. It's a really important message. And I want to make sure that everybody knows. I mean, this was said toward the end of this, especially. One, it's not a doom and gloom message. It can be a hopeful message. But I hope folks will remember a lot of the messages that David was talking about. It really boils down to, one, a wake-up call, and number two, reframing the issues and reframing the messages that we've got to get. I don't think anybody should go out there and use this as what we used to in law enforcement call train the trainers. I don't think David is here to train you to go out and say the same things to these groups to try to get their hair on fire to get out to work. The message is a wake-up call for all of us. It gives you the tools necessary that you need as a wake-up call to say, look, this is really serious. What is not just what's going on now, what's really been going on for the last 2 or 3 decades. I mean, folks have built a serious message machine that we've just never been able to fully meet and counter. And we end up talking about messages. We use the frames that Republicans use against us. It doesn't matter what it is. We have this tendency to talk about facts and figures and policies, and we use their frames. And when we do that, they tune people out. So I think one of the things that we've got to make sure we do is reframe a lot of this, understand the predicament we're in, and we are in a predicament across the country. We're in a predicament. And especially in the South, Ohio and other places, it's difficult to get folks to run for office if they're not seeing a path. And they're not seeing a path sometimes because the framing of the messages are not giving them that path. So a lot of what I think is going on across the country right now is the Democrats are finding their footing and they're finding their soul, and they're talking about the issues. And when you talk about the issues that mean something to people, you don't talk about it in somebody else's terms. You talk about it in your terms. That's what's important. David talked a lot about Georgia. We all talk about a lot about Georgia. Georgia's not blue yet, folks. I mean, Georgia won some races in 2020, big ones. I think it is certainly purple. It remains to be seen whether or not it's blue in 2022. Stacey's going to have a tough time. Warnock's going to have a tough time. Those races are really going to test everybody, I think. But remember, that started back in 2010. It wasn't Stacey Abrams' race in 2018. It started back in 2010 when they lost everything. And Stacey, the party, my old buddy DuBose Porter, who was chairman of the party at the time, started the Georgia Project and really started gaining speed. Jason Carter helped with that. Michelle Nunn helped with that in 2014. But David said something that was really important about Ohio and Biden and Stacey's race and what she said. It happened with me. I lost 2020, but guess what? I got more votes in 2020 than any Democrat in Alabama has ever got before. That is building. That is building, folks. And the goal that we have is to keep those folks coming out to the polls. And I will tell you, I think this is I think I heard Nick say this is the first time Demcast has been on since the night of the voting rights vote in the Senate. And I know everybody, including me, was extremely disappointed in that. But all is not lost, and you cannot give up hope. You cannot give up the drive to do the right thing. Doing the right thing has no end, folks. It has no end. And we've got to keep up that every effort that we can. But we've got to do it in a way, I believe, we've got to do it in a way that we meet people where they are and we talk to them about issues. We know in our mind exactly all the things that David was talking about the challenges and about how bad things are out there and why. But If you just go out and talk about that, people are going to go to their corners immediately. They're not going to respond to you. So you need to talk to them about those issues that are important, why it's important to vote, why democracy is really the kind of thing that has that everybody gets the access to vote. Everybody gets free and fair access to vote, and their votes have to count. People have to make sure that their vote is counted and it's certified by nonpartisan folks who are going to make sure that the winner of the election is the person who got the most votes. And I think we can do that. We cannot stop. We cannot give up. We may or may not get voting rights on a federal level, any voting protections on a federal level this year. We may not. There's a lot going on. I mean, we've got, look, I think that Joe Biden is on the cusp of a history-making Supreme Court appointment, the likes of which has never been seen in this country. And that will be something to celebrate. I think we're on the cusp of seeing our economy moving. We have got to start talking positively about the great things that is going on in this country. Yeah, we've just got some stumbles. We're staring down the barrel in Ukraine right now. We had a problem in Afghanistan. We've got a problem in inflation, but guess what? They're tackling all of that. And we've got an economy where we've created jobs, more jobs than any administration in history. We've got an economy that's rolling. We have done so many things, and this administration has done so many things, but we have gotten so bogged down and focused on things that we haven't gone to where people are to just tell them about it, to talk about it. And when somebody says, there's a whole lot of voter fraud, we got to do something to say, well, let's talk about that a little bit. I think we ought to pass some federal laws that'll stop that. And you stop that by having uniform standards. That's what the Freedom of the Vote Act does. It gives these uniform standards, and you meet people where they are and they talk about it, because we're not going to give up. We're not going to stop on voting rights. We're not going to stop on voter subversion and those things. We've got to make sure that we continue to stand up and speak out for all those things. I got to tell you, I was incredibly disappointed, but I am not giving up. And I don't think anybody on this call is either. We've got to continue to push. We've got to continue to talk. And I got to tell you, as much as some folks don't want to say it, and I'd love to see the federal legislation, we got to take in these states like Georgia and Texas and others, and we got to play the hand we've been dealt. And we got to get out there. The way that we get things changed is to be that change, to be the change, and to make sure we get out and win elections and get more people to the polls that will help us move this country forward. We can do that. We've seen it happen before. We saw it in Alabama in a special election in 2017. We've seen it across. We saw it in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and in Georgia and Arizona in the 2020 presidential race. We can do it. We can beat these folks at their own game to make sure that democracy is on the ballot. And in doing that, we build this democracy coalition that includes Democrats, it includes independents, it includes moderate Republicans who are really worried about the direction that their party is going. Building that democracy coalition is what we got to do, folks. You do that understanding what David has been telling you and the urgency of what we've got to work, but you do it by going to people, talking to them, fighting for what you believe, but talking to them and bringing them into the fold to help protect the democracy of this country. So Nick, Lori, Jamie, thanks for everybody for letting me come on here for a few minutes. I always love you guys and love to come on for a minute. I'm up in Boston. I'm teaching up in Boston one course, which for all of you guys on this call, you would get a kick out of this. The law school class I'm teaching is entitled The U.S. Senate Today, How It Works and Why It Doesn't. So it's a lot of fun. It's cold as hell up here. But I am headed back. I'll be in DC. I'll be in Alabama, and we're working. We're gonna keep going. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Thanks for coming, Doug.
Can I add one thing to what Doug Jones said? That
Absolutely.
is the way I also think we can inspire ourselves. That goes beyond, I think, where we are, where most of us are, including myself. We all have a footprint in this world of influence. And I think often and you guys aren't on this, but this is how I think we scale up our fight for democracy. Every one of us has a footprint, and we're waiting for sort of the Michelle Obama registration effort or the Stacey Abrams group to come to our state. And I'm not saying as you are, but I think generally that happens. And the way we can really scale efforts to save democracy is if every one of us thinks through almost our own Rolodex of influence, whether you're a mayor or a local activist. Are you doing everything? Is your mission statement and everything you do to lift democracy right now in the way that Doug was talking about? And by that, I mean, example, are you on the board of a homeless shelter? Are you registering people at the homeless shelter as people like Secretary of State LaRose in Ohio are purging those people? Do you have a friend or someone you supported who's the mayor of a town? Are they using every single public facing service of their city to register and engage voters, or aren't they? If they're not, tell them to. Every rec center, every health clinic, every library. Do you run a restaurant? Do you run a barber shop? I don't care what it is. Right now, we register voters for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Good for that. That's one very narrow stream. We should all be thinking through what else in the bloodstream of our lives or the organizations that we are part of can also be used to lift democracy and put it all to work for democracy. And my guess is if you think through your own sort of, again, footprint, there are all sorts of ways that we could all be lifting democracy right now that we never have. I'll just acknowledge, I was a city council member. I worked very hard to get earned income tax credit help in my city, but I didn't think to register voters because I didn't think democracy was part of the mission back in 2002 when I was doing it. We all need to add lifting democracy to our mission statements, and then that's personal interactions, that's facilities we're involved with. If there's a great local business that's registering voters, tell everyone about it and shop there and tell others to as well. I think there's so much more we can all be doing in this day-to-day battle with democracy. So I know every day I think about it, there's more I can do, and hopefully everyone on this call can think the same.
I think the good thing about everyone on this call is that everybody's in, and but I think that's a really good sort of thing that we can all do is
carry voter registration forms with you. Seriously, I register 15 voters a week at a freaking grocery store.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
So
that's
when
how
I
you
hear
hit the
somebody
scale.
complaining,
The way we hit
you know,
scale is
about
that we all are
something,
doing that. Yeah.
register to vote.
I want
Here in
to
Utah, we have a food.
say one thing about registering. I agree with you. Register voters, but it's not going to do a damn bit of good if they don't go to the polls.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Keep going.
And in my state, in Alabama, between 23-24% of registered voters have never cast a ballot, ever.
Right.
And the problem that Democrats have had and our candidate is that we wait and we try to get them out to the polls in the last minute before an election, and we don't engage with them on 12 months a year, 52 weeks out of the year, 365 days out of the year. You've got to engage with these voters constantly and get them out to the vote. Registering is good, but if they don't vote, who gives a damn?
And that's why I think we have to, when I say that homeless shelter, register, but then engage in every other way while they're there. You know, early votes coming up. Do you know what's going on? Like, think about, again, your footprint and how you can engage in all those ways.
Absolutely.
I love that. That's great advice. And I was just thinking to myself when you said that, David, that I belong to a progressive women's group on Facebook that frequently talks about businesses that we support by progressives, and what a great idea to talk to them about, like having a registration flyer to register to vote, and then following that up with, you know, what's going good and what's going bad according to who we've elected. So
absolutely,
I think
that's exactly what I'm talking about. And then once they do it, brag about them and tell everyone to buy food at those places because they're pro-democracy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. Nick, you want to close us out here?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the takeaway here is let's following the voting rights loss, we can't give up. I don't think anybody on this call will give up. let's all use our voices the way that we can, and think about what we're not thinking of in terms of making an impact on democracy and the fight for democracy. So I feel invigorated. I really appreciate both our guests for coming. Honored to have both of you on here. Sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I get to host these calls. But we will, for everybody on the call, we will be posting the video of this recording on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So it'll be up. So you can just go to YouTube and search for Dimcast and follow us there. Subscribe, right? And it'll be up. And then just again, Laboratories of Autocracy, David's book, can't recommend it enough. Tell your friends about it, and really appreciate Senator Jones and David, you coming to join us today.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night,
Fighting.
everybody.
Okay.